you all here. Um, I want to start off by introducing the RC to people who are here for the first time. RC07 began its life as a gender and development, women in development research committee of the International Political Science Association. But over the decades, successive chairs have redefined the scope of what we do, and we now think that very broadly we speak about the experience of marginalization in geographically north and south locations. So it's not location specific, continent specific, but experience specific. We are interested in development issues. We are interested in politics. We are interested in law. We are interested in violence, the whole works. And we're also now, I think, in keeping with the discourse in the real world, open to looking at, we're not talking about women alone, we're talking very broadly about gender. So in short, there's been something of a redefinition, but it's really an opening up of the traditional scope of the research committee. I'm going to hand over the session to Professor Anju Gupta, who will be chairing today and introducing our speaker. So with that, over to you, Professor. Anju? Mute.
Okay. Am I audible now? Great. So I'm really delighted to chair this session. Of course, the topic Women in Governance Institutions in Meghalaya is a very interesting topic. And nowadays, looking at how Meghalaya is, is in limelight, what is happening, what kind of society is it, and, what are the political, the political structure and the role of women in Meghalaya, is we are really, we are keen to know about the role of women in governance institutions in Meghalaya. So Meghalaya, as we all know, that it has heritage and progressive outlook, and it has always promoted the gender equality, and I think this webinar is going to provide us a valuable platform to discuss the strategies for enhancing women's participation in governance, addressing the existing barriers, and fostering a more inclusive and equitable society. So today we have Niharika Saikia, who is a doctoral research scholar at the Department of Women's Studies at St. Mira's College for Women, affiliated under Savitribai Phule, Pune University. With a deep commitment to promoting gender equality, social justice, and the empowerment of women, she has embarked on a scholarly journey to contribute to the discipline. She holds a bachelor's and a master's degree in political science from Miranda House, University of Delhi, from where she has developed a strong foundation in feminist theory and intersectionality. She's also a visiting faculty for Masters in Public Policy at Jain Online since 2022. And she has been awarded the UGC NET Junior Research Fellowship in Political Science. So I'm really delighted to all the participants to take an active part in this webinar. And over the next, I think, around 45 minutes to 50 minutes, we will all delve into the various aspects of women's involvement in governments in Meghalaya. So over to you, Niharika.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the introduction. Hello, everybody. Today, I would be talking about the role of women, in Meghalaya's traditional institutions of governance, a subject that kind of brings forward, a paradox. which is central to the society's gender dynamics. So I'll just take a second to share my screen here, and then we can begin with the presentation. Just give me a minute. All right. I hope the screen is visible to everyone. Do let me know if there are any problems regarding the audio and the visuals. So, as you know, the topic of my presentation is women in traditional institutions of governance in Meghalaya, India. So I would like to begin with a quote. It is a very famous, proverb in Khasi. And it goes like, when the hen crows, it is then that the world ends. So it is because hens do not usually crow, they cuckle, roosters, they crow. So we will get into the deeper meaning of using this particular proverb later. But this is the content of my presentation today, just a brief introduction. Then we'll go into what the traditional institutions of governance are. Moving on to the historical roots, to the sixth schedule, and finally coming to the contemporary challenges and potential reforms and pathways. So, Meghalaya is, a state in northeastern part of India that stands apart from, the rest of the country due to its distinct cultural and traditional practices, particularly the matrilineal social structure. And it is one of the few regions of the world that follows a matrilineal system, especially among the three tribes of Khasi, Jaintia, and Garos that inhabit the region. And in these communities, your inheritance, your lineage, family lineage, it is passed through the women, particularly the youngest daughter, who is known as the Khaddu in Khasi. And she is the custodian of the ancestral property, family property, and she is responsible for maintaining the lineage of the family. Now, on the surface, this system, it suggests a society where women, they are holding significant power, right? And they have a lot of influence. And indeed, they do have some sort of influence in their family lives. Um, but when we shift the focus to traditional structures of governance, institutions like the Dorbar Shnongs, which are your traditional village councils, a completely different picture comes up. So, despite having this centrality, in their state, women, they are systematically excluded from the decision-making process within these governance bodies. And the paradox here is striking because while women, they are central to the continuity of the family, to the continuity of the society, they are not allowed to participate in the institutions that govern their whole community life. So, and this exclusion of women from the village councils, it is not, a recent development. So traditional bodies, they exclusively consist of male members, and they have been operating in this way since pre-colonial times, since generations. And this reality actually raises, an important question as to how did a society, that values women's roles so deeply in its social, in its familial fabric, how did they come to exclude them from its most crucial political and governance, structures? Like, how did these institutions become bastions of male authority only, in a system that at least superficially also is centered on women? So, before I begin, it is important to identify my background as a researcher as well. So, I was born and brought up in Guwahati, Assam, which is a neighboring state of Meghalaya, and hence my outsider, positionality to the Khasi community, which brings in both, of course, challenges and unique perspectives. The field of study is Khasi Hills Autonomous District Council, primarily the Khasi community. And to be honest, I have selected this particular area as my field of study because of its accessibility from my place of residence, as I also stay in the border areas of Assam and Meghalaya. And also considering the whole of Meghalaya, the entire 11 districts, the field size becomes too vast for my research. And then the Khasi Hills Autonomous District Council has 4 districts under it. You have East Khasi Hills, sorry. You have the East Khasi Hills, West Khasi Hills, Southwest Khasi Hills, and Rebhoy, as you can see on the map here. And I am applying a qualitative feminist research methodology for my thesis. And the tools that I have been using are semi-structured interviews to begin with, for the people who are not members of the executive committee of the Dorbars. And then it is followed by the focus group discussions with the executive members of the Dorbar Shnongs only. Now, coming to the traditional governance systems in Meghalaya, Meghalaya's political organization has been demarcated by these 4, stages. First, you have a clan council that we known as the Dorbar Kur. So it is headed by the clan elder, who is mostly your maternal uncle, and they manage the domestic affairs of the clan itself. Now, then comes your Dorbar Shnong, which is the village council, and this presentation is focusing on village councils only. So, a lot of clans in a particular area in one particular village, they form the village council, the Dorbar Shnong, and they manage the affairs of the village. And then comes your Dorbar Ride. It is like a commune council, a group of villages. And they look at your inter-village issues concerning, the Khasi villages that make up that existing ride. And then a lot of rides, they form the Dorbar Hima, which is the state council. Now, the state council is not to be confused with the state of Meghalaya, because before in the pre-colonial times, the Khasis, they existed as different states, prior to the advent of the British, and they had their own states of their own, and those were known as Himas. And initially, there were 25 in number. So this is still like the system of this state council is still present. And the state councils, they have a couple of villages under them. They have a demarcated area, you know, and they do have direct elections as well. So Dorbar Shnongs, they are the village councils, local village governance bodies. They are run by the male elders. So the Dorbar Shnongs, they typically have mostly 3 different parts. If you see on the, if you can see on the screen, you have an executive committee with your all male members, and then you have 2 groups. You have a women's organization, and then you have a youth organization. So the thing is, whenever they hold a meeting, which is called a general meeting, your women's organization and the youth organization can participate in that meeting, but the decisions are not taken in that meeting itself. It is just a general discussion, of issues which the organizations may have, found something which they have found is happening in their village, and they want to bring it to the forefront. So they always bring it to the Dorbar Shnaks. So one thing I would like to point out here as well is that Dorbars, these informal Dorbars, they are the key point for all the citizens. Like if something is happening in the village, be it domestic violence or property related issues, people don't go to the law. People don't go to the police. They come to the Dorbars first. So the Dorbars, they have this ability to sort out, any issues of the villagers within themselves without having the need to call the police or involving the law in that manner. So in the general meeting, everybody is present there. You have women, you have youth. But when the time actually comes to make your decisions, only the executive committee can do that. So the executive committee is an all-male committee. Women are not a part, or they are not allowed to be a part of that executive committee. And this is since historical times. We will be getting into that a while later. And historically, the executive committee, it makes decisions regarding everything, conflict resolution, community development, political, campaigning, and all of that. So the executive committee, like the Dorbar, it is headed by the Rangba, which is the village headman. And the word Rangba itself translates to village headman. So you know that there is no scope for women to come up to these leadership positions as well. And these Dorbars, they operate in a way of direct democracy. If the people, they are uncontested, people who want to be a part of these committees, they are uncontested, then they automatically become a member of that committee. And if they, there are a lot of people standing up for that same post, maybe it may be for the village headman, it may be for the treasurer, and so on and so forth, then all the people of that particular village come together and vote as to who they would select directly. So direct democracy happens, elections to the office of the headman, to the other office bearers are directly held by the members of the village as well. Now, to understand the exclusion of women from, the governance in Meghalaya, it is very crucial to trace the historical evolution of the Dorbar Shnongs, because Dorbars, they have, their roots in the pre-colonial times, dispute resolution, resource management, maintaining social harmony. Everything was managed by the Dorbars itself. Now, despite the matrilineal structure, that defines these communities or the Khasi community, the governance systems, they have paradoxically, been always male dominated, right? So this disparity can be traced back to your historical beliefs about your gender roles. So while women in these societies, they hold significant power within their own household, and they, of course, they are central to the continuation of the lineage. Public authority and the decision making, they were traditionally seen as male responsibilities. So men, they were protectors, they were warriors. So they were entrusted with the issues or handling the matters of the outside world. Issues such as diplomacy, warfare, community disputes. And this division of responsibility, while it was customary, it created a space where women's voices, they were underrepresented in your community governance. And the situation, it further became a little complicated when the British came to India as well. Advent of the British colonial rule in the 19th century. The British, they did not want to do away with these local systems, to overhaul these local systems, but they rather wanted to maintain the stability, and to manage their colonial interest through the local elites. So this approach, known as indirect rule, it involved working with the already existing leadership structures, right? Which were, again, already male dominated. So, as a result, the colonial officers, they primarily engaged with your male leaders, right, of the Dorbar Shnong. And women, despite having this centrality in their domestic and cultural life, they were overlooked in the matters of your governance. And this solidified your gender disparity, right? It further sidelined women from the decision-making process. And the British administration, they also formalized the chieftainship of Khasi society. It is known as CMship, and other traditional leadership positions. And they did not acknowledge women's potential role in governance at all. So the male chiefs, male council members, they became institutionalized as the official interlocutors, between the British and the local population. So while the matrilineal system, it persisted in your domestic spheres, in your social spheres, this dichotomy that you have between the private and the public, it became more pronounced. So women, they continued to, have authority within the home, within their familial decisions, but their absence from the public governance meant that their perspectives, their concerns were rarely represented, right, in the broader community decisions. And this division, it has led to what some scholars term as a gendered governance gap, where women's social powers do not translate into political powers. Then after 1947, after India's independence, the political landscape of Meghalaya, like the much of India, it underwent significant changes. Meghalaya, even though it achieved statehood on 21st January 1972, the sixth schedule was pushed forward for the state. So Indian government, it pushed for greater women's, inclusivity in your political life. You had all these mechanisms in place, like your Panchayati Raj, reservations for women in local bodies, and also the sixth schedule. But the sixth schedule, it grants special autonomy to your tribal areas, right? It allowed these traditional systems to operate with minimal intervention. And it is important to understand here that, this exclusion, it was not an outright rejection of women's capabilities, right? But it was based on all of those long-standing customs that you had, which again were further, entrenched by your colonial administrative practices. So these practices, they reinforced your male dominance in governance under the pretext of preserving your tradition. Thereby, it ignored all the potential that these institutions had to evolve. Moving on to the next part of the sixth schedule. So, as I mentioned earlier, adopted in 1950 itself under Article 244 of the Indian Constitution. The sixth schedule, it was designed to ensure, the protection, the autonomy of your tribal communities so that they can preserve their customs, their cultures, their ways of governance. And this section, this schedule, it grants significant freedom to your tribal areas, districts and regions. It allows them to maintain your traditional governance structures while exercising a degree of self-rule through your autonomous district councils. So one of the key objectives of sixth schedule is to preserve the traditions, right? Preserve the customs, the unique governance systems of your traditional and your tribal communities. And while this is very, very important, of course, for indigenous, tribal identity and culture, it also means that all the patriarchal structures, they have been embedded in these systems. They remain largely unchallenged. So the Dorbash right, which are very central to the community life, are male-dominated institutions, positions of power, like the headman, the other council members in the executive committee. Traditionally, all are held by men. So the sixth schedule, it recognized these councils, it legitimized these councils, it has effectively sanctioned their gender exclusive practices. So women's exclusion from the Dorbash is not explicitly mandated, by the sixth schedule, of course. But the emphasis here is on maintaining the customary laws, okay, and customary practices. So this leaves very little room, for reform. So in this way, your sixth schedule, it can be seen as a double-edged sword, right? It protects your indigenous governance structures from external intervention, but it also freezes certain inequalities, within these systems, such as gender exclusion. Now, while the Constitution of India, it also guarantees your equality before law. We have Article 14, we have non-discrimination on the basis of gender, Article 15. These rights, they do not fully extend to the areas which are governed under the sixth schedule. So as a result, women who are excluded from the decision-making process in the Dorbash Nongs, they have very little resource to challenge these practices within the framework of the sixth schedule itself. And this freedom, this autonomy that the sixth schedule has provided, it has allowed your male dominated structures to remain unchallenged over time. So the post independence period, it has seen very little movement towards gender reform within these institutions, because any attempt to introduce, women's participation, they are often seen as the form of resistance, under the banner of preserving tradition. And this debate that you have between modernization and preserving your tradition, it is a very contentious one. So, and the sixth schedule's emphasis on autonomy, right? It makes it very difficult to push for reforms that would align, these traditional systems with broader gender equality principles. Now, moving on to the main part of this presentation, that is contemporary challenges. Because despite your significant strides, in gender equality across the world, traditional institutions of governance, these Dorbalshnongs, they continue to reflect your deep-rooted gender biases. Firstly, it is patriarchal traditions and cultural resistance. So, since time immemorial, politics, civil defense, justice, and priesthood, all of these are seen as domains of men. And, at the heart of the exclusions, yes, at the heart of the exclusion of women from the Dorbarshnongs, there lies a strong adherence to these patriarchal traditions. So in Meghalaya, the idea that leadership, it is inherently a male prerogative. It is deeply entrenched in your cultural beliefs. So while women, they are central to matrilineal inheritance, and kinship practices, they are simultaneously kept out of public decision-making spaces. So we can go back to the first, proverb that I used at the beginning of this presentation. Like when the hens crow, people believe that the world is going to end. So in Meghalaya, women who voice out their opinions on public affairs in the public space, they are regarded as crowing hens. So this is almost a taboo in the state. They are chastised, they are regarded as, freaks of nature. Their opinions, they are not taken into account at all. So this is why women, they do not even want to be in that public space or to even voice out their opinions or to be a part of these institutions. So this dichotomy, it kind of reflects a broader societal norm, that celebrates women's role in the family, but it limits their participation in leadership roles outside their homes. So attempts to challenge this exclusion, it often is faced with a very, very strong resistance from both men and women in these communities. Many argue that, bringing in women in your Darbashnong, it is going to disrupt the natural order of your Khasi societies, where the men, they are expected to lead. So this cultural resistance, it makes it very difficult to introduce reforms that is going to make governance more inclusive. And moreover, your community leaders, they often frame, the preservation of your traditional gender roles as essential for maintaining your tribal identity. So any suggestion, any reform, it is met with opposition under the banner of protecting your cultural heritage, making it a big challenge for activists, for organizations who are working towards gender equality to get a sort of foothold in these discussions. Now, coming to legal and structural barriers, as we discussed in relation to the sixth schedule, the legal framework, it does pose a lot of additional challenges in women's inclusion and governance. The autonomy that is being granted by or to these traditional institutions of governance under the sixth schedule, it has been critical to preserve the tribal customs and governance practices. However, it also means that the national laws, national policies promoting gender equality, such as the 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act that we had, which mandates one-third reservation for women in Panchayati Raj institutions, it does not apply to areas which are governed by the sixth schedule. So as a result, while women in other parts of the country, of India, they are increasingly becoming a part of the local governance through their panchayats. women in Meghalaya, they remain largely excluded from the Darbars. So this legal loophole, it entrenches your gender exclusion. It makes it very difficult to advocate for women's representation within the framework of traditional governance. And additionally, again, there is a lack of formal, channels for women to challenge this exclusion, right, from these institutions. Because in Meghalaya, the customary law, it governs the Dorbar Shnong. It does not recognize the rights of women to participate in decision making. Okay. Earlier, it used to be like, in the pre-colonial times, it was the maternal uncle who used to represent the voices of the women of the clan in these institutions. And then, these institutions, they were said to be surrounded by spirits. So women who were expecting a child, who were pregnant, they were, asked not to be a part of these institutions because they could, get the spirits inside them and so on and so forth. But these traditions, they have been long gone. Now the clan system does not quite exist. Now it is just individual families, nuclear families, and yet women, they are still being kept apart from these institutions of governance on the pretext of maintaining tradition. So, without any formal legal route, to appeal for this exclusion, women, they are left with very little recourse. They are left to rely on grassroots activism, on external interventions to demand any sort of an inclusion in these institutions. And then institutional inertia is another significant challenge. So Doorbars, they have operated, long operated in ways that center your male authority, right? There is reluctance to disrupt this sort of an established system, mainly because the men in Meghalaya, they feel that women are very empowered in their state. Women, they have property, they have lineage. The children, the men in Meghalaya, when they marry the women, they go to the women's house, right? Unlike the other parts of the country, they carry the women's last name, and even the children, they carry their mother's last name. And hence, they feel women are very empowered, and hence they want to keep these institutions, mostly domains of politics for themselves. So, and that is why they do not want to change these established systems. So, in many cases, the argument is made that men are more experienced, they are more capable of handling governance matters, while the women's role, they are seen as more domestic, more cultural, and of course, the lack of formal education, the lack of political experience among women is often cited as a reason to exclude them. So, this rationale, it ignores the fact that men in these institutions often gain their positions only through lineage and not through merit. And the broader structural resistance to change is also evident in your ADCs, autonomous district councils, that function under your sex schedule. So these councils, theoretically, they are very progressive, than the Dorbar Shnongs, but they still lack female representation. And there is often a very tokenistic, I would say, inclusion of women in advisory roles rather than in leadership positions. Coming to the urbanization and modernity paradox. Now, urbanization in Meghalaya, especially in its capital of Shillong, it has introduced a lot of new social and economic dynamics that further complicate the role of women in governance. Because on one hand, urbanization to education, to employment opportunities, it has led to a more empowered and vocal female population. And this has been reflected in your increasing involvement of women in your civil society organizations and in the activism for women's rights. Now, on the other hand, however, the modernity, which has been brought by this urbanization, it has not necessarily translated into greater participation or of women in these Dorbar Shnongs. Because in fact, in urban areas where traditional values are still held very, very dear, the exclusion of women from the Dorbar Shnong still persists. So this creates a paradox, in which women, they are empowered in all other spheres of life, but they are still denied a voice in their own communities when it comes to governance. And then coming to tokenism, women's role is recognized as a mere tokenism and not substantive change because I think last year, the Khasi Hills Autonomous District Councils, they agreed, that they are going to pass a resolution where all the Dorbash Nongs are going to have to admit two women into the executive committee. Now, even though a lot of people see this as a win for women, um, most of the women, they do not agree with this resolution because they feel it is just a tokenistic approach, just to keep women happy and just so that no uproar happens in the state. uh, the Autonomous District Council has taken a decision because the executive committee members in the Dorbash Nogs, they range from 20 to 30 members, and just a mere two-member selection of women is not going to help them bring about the gender equality that they want to. Because in a space, if you have, it is clearly being dominated by men, and you are there just because you have to be there, not because the people want you there. People, the males there, they are not going to listen to your views, or they are not going to give importance to what you are going to say. So hence women feel that this two women member in the executive committee is a very political and a very tokenistic move from the Khasi Hills Autonomous District Council. Now, moving on to the last part of this presentation, that is potential reforms and pathways, because um, addressing this exclusion of women from the traditional institutions of governance is very complex, but also it is very necessary, if we want gender equality to be achieved in this region. So, first is your legal reforms and constitutional amendments. So, one of the most direct, I would say, approaches to promoting gender inclusivity in Meghalaya's traditional institution would be through legal reforms. Because since the sixth schedule, it grants autonomy to the tribal communities in the Northeast. It provides a legal foundation for Dorbars, right? And also the other traditional bodies to function. Now, this autonomy, it is viewed as, an obstacle for ensuring women's rights, given that a lot of national gender equality laws do not apply in these areas. So one potential solution could be the introduction of your state level legislative measures that could bring the Dorbars in line with with India's broader constitutional commitment to gender equality. Like, for instance, a constitutional amendment, it can be proposed to ensure that the principles of equality, they are outlined in Article 14 and 15 of the Indian Constitution, which pertains to right to equality and, and prohibition of discrimination. And these are upheld by the traditional institutions of governance under the sixth schedule. So this would help, reconcile the tension between cultural autonomy and gender justice, and ensure that the customs, they do not perpetuate gender exclusion. And also extending the 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act, which mandates one-third, reservation for women in Panchayati Raj institutions. It could be brought to areas governed by the sixth schedule, and because if women, they are guaranteed a certain percentage, right, of representation in the Dorbars, it is going to open a lot of doors for more active participation in the local governance. Now, while the legal reforms, they are essential, they must be accompanied by a shift in the cultural perceptions about gender roles in the Khasi community as well. So a significant reform strategy, it would include your community level dialogues, right? Educational initiatives aimed at challenging the deep-seated patriarchal beliefs that still continue to marginalize women. So engaging your community leaders, engaging your respected leaders, who hold sway in your traditional governance institutions, it can be crucial in fostering a cultural shift. So, by framing women's inclusion not as a break from tradition, but as an evolution of tradition, rooted in the whole matrilineal, values of respect for women, such initiatives, it can lead to greater acceptance of women in the leadership roles. Then, coming to the structure of the Dorbar Shnong, another potential reform lies in restructuring the internal governance process of the Dorbars. So, to make them more inclusive. So, traditionally, Dorbars were composed of your male elders, who are chosen based on their lineage, based on the social standing. So, reforming the selection process to include women, it can be a very critical step towards dismantling this entrenched gender bias in these institutions. And as I mentioned earlier, one potential model could be the quota system, right, within the Dorbar. So it ensures that a certain percentage of members are women. And this has, of course, proven effective in other parts of India. In Panchayati Raj systems, they have increased women's participation and influence in decision making. So, inclusion of women, not as a token, not as mere advisory figures, but as official members, right? It would give them a genuine voice in the governance of their communities. And even though Dorbars, they do have these women's organization, as I mentioned earlier, including them to be a part of the decision-making process can also reform the structure of the Dorbar. Because according to the interviews that I had taken, um, most of these meetings, they happen in the office of the Dorbars in urban areas and in community schools in the rural areas. So what the women do is, even though they are in the meeting, they sit outside at the periphery. They sit outside on the balconies. They do not take part in the meetings. They do not even enter the room where the meetings are happening. So bringing these women's organization into the executive committee's meetings can be a very good step to promote, the inclusivity of women in the Dorbar Shnogs. And another potential for reform lies in engaging the younger generation of the Khasi communities, because with increasing urbanization, with increasing, exposure to modern values, younger people, they are often more open to the idea of greater gender equality, right, than their elders. So reform initiatives that involve your young leadership, programs, gender sensitization workshops, awareness campaigns, all of these can serve as catalyst for change. And moreover, younger generation, they increasingly interact with global values through your digital media, right? Through educational opportunities. So there is a lot of potential to bridge the gap between tradition and modernity, and by fostering a sort of a dialogue between the older, more conservative community members and the younger, more progressive ones, it is possible to introduce gender inclusive reforms without alienating those who are more attached to the traditional ways of life. And finally, partnering with your national, international women's rights organizations, they can provide the necessary support to drive the change in Meghalaya, because external support, they can come in the form of advocacy. They can come in the form of, funding, right, for reform initiatives, or training women leaders in the community. So such partnerships, it can help amplify your local efforts. They can bring attention to the issues, on a broader scale. And this is going to help create a sort of political pressure, if needed, for more substantive reforms. So to conclude, the traditional institutions of governance like the Dorbar Shnongs in Meghalaya, they remain very important. They are very vital, to the social and political fabric of your Khasi communities. However, the exclusion of women from the decision-making process, it is a very clear barrier to achieving true gender equality in the region. The historical roots of this exclusion, which is shaped by both your cultural practices and, of course, colonial influence, it continues to perpetuate this marginalization of women within these systems. Yet, the challenges women face today in gaining access to these government structures, they are not insurmountable. Through a combination of legal reforms, cultural shifts, community level advocacy, changes, restructuring within the Dorbars themselves, there is a path forward to make these institutions more inclusive and equitable. The recognition of women's contribution, both historically and in the contemporary society, it is very crucial for this transformation. So the transformation of the Dorbar Shnong into a more inclusive institution is not just about fulfilling your legal obligations, right, or adhering to the modern trends. It is about empowering half of the population to have a voice in the decisions that shape their lives and their communities. So as Meghalaya, it navigates the future, the role of women in governance, it is going to be very central to the progress and to its success. So it ensures that the state remains a beacon of matrilineal values while embracing the principles of gender equality. So that is all for my presentation. Um, Thank you. And I think maybe we can open up the floor for more discussions. I'll just stop sharing my screen here.
It's small group. I don't know if Professor Gupta is here. The small group,
Uh,
so you can leave
yes,
your
yes.
comments or just.
I am there, Swarna, and Niharika. It was a very good presentation because to know about what the local, like we have village panchayats in Meghalaya. You are talking about the Dobar Shnongs. So I think there's a common problem everywhere. These, although there much of reservation is there, it is given, but still the male dominance, whether it be it is a patriarchal society, or say it is uh, matriarchal in your, especially in the state of Meghalaya, it is matrilineal. So I think the problem remains same for every society. These are male dominated, but it is well presented. I have uh, I mean, when I was going through your presentation, and when I came to know about what are the real challenges, the apart, in fact, in my opinion, I found, when I went to Meghalaya, I found that females are more empowered than the other societies. But I think the challenge is still the same. What I find is that there should be more awareness campaigns. So the women should be more aware, especially through younger generation, because as far as I know, the representation in the local bodies in Tripura is better than Meghalaya. And it is, I think, through the awareness campaigns and making local people aware of their, especially female, about their rights. So I would now invite the questions from the participants. Anything which you know do we have any questions, Swarna?
We have several questions in the chat. And Niharika, do you want to read your own questions or shall I do it for you?
Ma'am, I can do it. It's all right.
Swarna, can I also
This is
speak?
this is being recorded, so if you would read out the question, that would be good. Somebody else wanted to pop in and say something.
Yeah, it's me. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Anjuman here.
Yes, ma'am, you're audible.
Okay, hello. Thank you very much for your research and your presentation. It's very excellent. I really enjoyed. I am also writing a paper on customary laws and traditional bodies in Arunachal Pradesh, especially
Okay.
focusing on Kebang system, which is something similar, but there's some differences also there. The thing is that I was just saying that after studying the laws and how it has been done in Arunachal Pradesh, what I feel is that without the kind of reforms that we are suggesting, the substantive equality, if we want to introduce as in the constitution or as in the CEDAW, it is difficult to bring without any kind of codification. And if we promote codification, then people also say that it will not remain as customary law, or it will not remain as tradition once you write it down. However, there can be some regulations, like in Arunachal Pradesh, they have already, amended the Act of Regulation, Local Government Regulation 1945, which they have amended again into 2023. However, they did not make any changes regarding women's participation in these bodies. But because some women who are influential in all the Kebang, they include them just out of their respect or because their own capability or their influence. If a woman is very influential, they cannot ignore her, so they include them. However, after some case study, I could realize that if women are excluded, it makes a huge difference in the decisions. Like sometimes the men are coming and giving some local beer and apong and all to the members, and he gets the order in his favor. And also now, as per the law, these traditional bodies are also, legally sanctioned. So apart from the government is regulating, strengthening them, this body as it is, without questioning whether they are just or it should continue like this, or we should, given the time, we should improve and adopt the kind of equality that prescribed in the constitution. So this kind of
Yes,
conflict
ma'am.
comes. Similarly, I'm also from Meghalaya, from Kara Hills. So in Kara Hills also this, if you see the Nokma Council usually it is designed in the old government should be there. But if you see the Nokma Council is now only male members are there. And also, when Meghalaya government recommended central government to bring some amendment in the sixth schedule, to form village council and municipal council within the this Nukma system. They themselves sixth schedule amendment to sixth schedule. They themselves are opposing this. That we don't want. We want to remain as it is. They want to remain the status quo. So in this situation, I mean, I'm not asking you this question. It's difficult to ask, but whether codification can be a solution or not, it's I am also doubtful. So we don't know how it is. But I would like to share one example. Like you can consider this, like say in Nagaland, that when women's participation was an issue. In the local governance, there was protest and all. It became a huge issue. But ultimately, when Supreme Court has given the order that no, this is 33%, you have to follow it, and now the election has been held, you know So ultimately, maybe we have to look into the legal and a judicial way and to bring some reforms, but it should be definitely not, threatening or imposing towards community, but slowly maybe they can accept it. So these are some of the thoughts. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. And it's
One
absolutely true because there are a couple of men's rights group also in Meghalaya known as SRT. I do not know the Khasi full form of that. So they are, trying to promote men's rights because they feel men are very disempowered in the state and they are very much, against women being in these Darbar shnongs. So there are a lot of, subtleties like that. Even when I talked to the members of the Darbar, they were very, very reluctant for their doorbars to change. Even in the coming, centuries or years, I posed a question as to like how comfortable would you be, if one day all the members in your doorbar they became women and all of them they just said no and they're like no we cannot let this happen. So I think codification is actually the first step to bringing any sort of a reform because people they are still in that mindset of traditionality and customary laws.
one thing, Niharika, I would just question is that it's really difficult to change the customary laws because the acceptability of the society is, it is almost, it is, I mean, they don't want to change. And to
Hmm.
change the customary law is not that easy because that
Yes,
is why
ma'am.
they have legalized, probably,
Hmm.
you know,
Yes,
they
ma'am.
have not changed it, they have legalized it, as you said in your
Hmm.
presentation.
Hmm.
So I
Yes,
think
ma'am.
that is also the biggest challenge is that these, these local bodies, they run through customary laws and it is very
Hmm.
difficult to challenge them and to again restructure them.
Yes, ma'am. It is. Because the first thing that all of them have said when I posed this question, as to why women are not a part of the Darbars, the men mostly, they have said it is because of the customs, it is because of our traditions. Since a long time, women have not been a part, and we would not want women to be a part of the Darbars as well. But women, they see very differently. Even though they acknowledge that, yes, it is the custom, they do want to bring a sort of change in those, along those lines.
And Swarna, I think you would also agree that in most of the, the local or the village panchayats, although all women are granted, some seats are reserved for women, still the male counterpart, they rule. So it
Hmm.
is not only in, Meghalaya, it is, as I said, it's not only in Meghalaya, I think in the, in the whole India, I suppose, especially if we talk about global south, these things, they still exist. And I think giving them the economic rights doesn't serve the purpose
Yes,
because,
ma'am.
it has to be politically sound,
Yes,
giving
ma'am.
them the rights in the property, or, the society is named after, the youngest daughter, and the family continues. But I think more empowerment, political empowerment is very essential.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely.
Swarna, any other questions? I think Yukti has raised some. Uh,
Ma'am, I just have a small comment to make if time permits.
yes, sure, sure, sure.
Okay, so Niharika, first of all, it was a very nice presentation, and I am someone who hails from Rajasthan, and to know, about the entire thing, about the entire the local democratic structure and the local political participation that's happening in Meghalaya is just amazing. But one thing I'd like to, point out here is that in Rajasthan, here we have this entire 71st Constitutional Amendment Act, and we have proper reservations for women in Panchayati Raj institutions in rural as well as the urban local bodies also. But one thing which I found very similar while you were giving your entire presentation was, though we have this constitutional protection in the form of 71st Constitutional Amendment Act, but still how you highlighted the concept of maternal uncles, here in
Hmm.
Rajasthan we have very much the concept of Sarpanch Pati, which is again that the constitution has given you all the right, all the freedom, but then the political mindset or in academic terms we use the term this political culture about the belief
Hmm.
that we hold. I mean, main
Hmm.
challenge is that only how to change the belief, because now even the constitution has given you the right that okay, fine, one third seats are reserved for women, but then the society and the mindset of people is not yet ready to accept it. So how you highlighted that constitutional reforms can bring the changes, yes, definitely it can, might be, and I hope it brings in case of Meghalaya. But when I look into Rajasthan, I mean, there's still people are very smart to find loopholes, or to find
Hmm.
solutions how to moderate them according to them.
Thank you, Yukti. There are two questions. I think maybe I can just answer them very briefly.
Yes, sure,
Yeah.
sure.
Okay. Uh, okay, so one question is from Ayushi. Thank you so much for your question, Ayushi. The members and attitudes or response towards younger generations. Um, so you wanted to know the attitudes of the members of the Darbar Shnong in like towards the younger generations, right? So, mostly they don't really have any skeptical, attitudes toward the younger generation, in particular. They do want, like, the members of the Darbar Shnong, in order to be a member of the Darbar Shnong, the thing is that you have to own a land in that village. So that is why they are not quite, going for that, okay, we need young men in the Darbar Shnong Executive Council as well. But it's mostly an attitude towards women that they have, which is, along the negative side. Baki, they do have a youth organization as well. And apparently the youth organizations, they are also very, active in that manner. If something, mostly drugs is a very big case right now in Meghalaya. So youth organizations are at the forefront to, see as to where these things are happening, if they need to report it to the Darbar Shnongs. So they are at the forefront of these movements. So in that way, the relationship between the members of the executive council and the youths, they are pretty fine, I would say, at this particular point of time. And another question was from Snigdha. Even cabinet ministers have opinions on women's seats in Darbars, but not as heads, just as members following old traditions. Is there any specific reason, or is it just the patriarchal mindset? Okay, so yes, as you mentioned, it is absolutely true that cabinet ministers, they do want women to be a part of the Darbar Shnongs. But again, they don't want them to be the heads, because the head of the village council, the name itself is called head man. Rangba, it means head man. So it is not just patriarchal, I would say it is because of tradition, and they want to keep that tradition alive. That okay, the leader should be a man, even though women, they can be a part of the executive council, but they want the leader to be a man. So just to keep their traditions, keep their cultures, customary laws alive, this is why they have mentioned it as that way.
Thank you so much, Niharika.
Thank you for your questions.
I think you can wrap now, Anju.
Today we had a wonderful session, and I hope that we organize more such sessions, raising new concerns over gender issues. And it had been a wonderful and very informative session, rather, I can say.
Let me
Niharika's
just cut in, Anju, and say little commercial here. We do this every month, third Wednesday evening, 5:30, 1200 UTC. There is a form that you can pitch with.
No, Swarna, actually, I'm talking about, raising such issues, especially, specifically over for a region, about the local institutions, what is happening in the local institutions, since it is my first webinar. So definitely it was a very good experience. And I hope to be a part of this webinar series once again. I hope Swarna would again give me a chance to probably to present my presentation or my own, research. So thank you everyone for joining, and I hope we will meet soon, another month.